It's welcome to Milton, right? Number 2. Okay.
There we go.
All right, it
Now
is
we're
6
on.
o'clock. Call this meeting to order. We will start with the flag salute.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will move into roll call. Commissioner Boyle,
Here.
Commissioner Whalen,
Here.
Commissioner Sweat,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Present.
Commissioner Zaro,
Here.
Vice Chair Oler reported absent, and Chair Elliott here.
Yes, she is sick, so she called in.
Okay.
I make a motion to excuse Vice Chair Oler from tonight's meeting.
Second.
All right, a motion has been made to excuse Vice Chair Oler and has been seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimous. All right, any additions, deletions, or corrections to tonight's agenda? And then, yes, Commissioner Whalen.
Just a quick one, item number 9 that says next regular meeting, November 6th. That will be a special meeting for us, as is tonight. So just make that correction on the agenda, and then I guess we're discussing if we're going to have our regular meeting on the 13th?
We're leaving it for now to see if we may need it, but if for some reason the 6th goes super smoothly, then we could cancel it.
Okay. So it's just a note that our next meeting is a special time, regular meeting, and then the 13th would be,
So the 6th is the special meeting because it's the first Wednesday, and then the 13th would be the regular.
okay. So our next regular meeting, yeah. All right, so next meeting is special meeting on the 6th. One item that was discussed with staff was the proposed idea of moving agenda item 6B, since it's a discussion item, to the end of the regular agenda. So it would go 6A, C, D, E, F, then B. The reason for that is because C, D, E, and F are action items that we also foresee being able to get through a little quicker. And then B might be more of an introduction that continues into another meeting. I can just do a quick check for consensus. Is everyone okay with that idea?
Okay. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move that around. And then anything else for tonight's agenda? Okay. We'll take it into citizen participation. Again, we are online. No one present in the room here. And then approval of minutes for September 11th, 2024.
I move to approve the minutes for September 11th, 2024.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes from September 11th, 2024. That's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimous. That will take it into our regular agenda. First up is agenda item 6A. We have Framework here to give us a small update.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Planning Commission members. Jeff Arango with Framework, and we have a few slides we're going to go over in your packet. But before I do that, I would just like to mention we're going to be attending exhibitors at the APA conference over the next couple of days. We're actually going to be doing a session with Anjali and a few others, which we're excited about. But for that, we printed the draft of some of our draft plans, including for Milton. This doesn't include all of the elements, but it includes a number of them. And so if you want to see a high-quality print document, I can pass it around. You're welcome to take a look at it. And I will unfortunately have to bring it with me, but I can get some of those printed once it's final for the city. So anyways, if you're interested, take a look at that. So tonight for our agenda, we're going to be talking about the Land Development Code updates. And those updates are required to ensure consistency with the comprehensive plan, which is a requirement under the Growth Management Act, and also to implement a number of the recent legislation that was passed, some of which we've discussed with you over the course of putting the comp plan together. So we'll start with the proposed zoning map, then we'll go through the land development dimensional standards, which apply across all of the new and existing zoning districts. Look at the bulk dimensional standards, talk a little bit about parking requirements. There is a bill that was passed that does require cities to make sure that they're aligned with the requirements of that bill. And then just briefly highlight a few other topics that are also requirements. We'll take in your feedback tonight, and then within about a week or so, we'll give you a full draft that we've been working on of these topics. So it gives us an opportunity to preview the content with you, get your feedback, and incorporate that into our current draft. So with that, we'll go to page 3 of your packet, which is the proposed zoning map. Just a couple things to note here. So if you'll recall, the future land use map has one designation that applies to the 2 residential zones, which are RS and RMD, the lower density ones. We're proposing to maintain those as distinct zoning districts, but we're just for clarity proposing to change the name from R1 to R1 and R2. Again, kind of a superficial change, but makes it a little bit easier to understand the hierarchy with the numbers rather than using the acronyms. The other thing to just note, there's the neighborhood commercial district shown in the lighter red color, and then the new uptown mixed use district, which is shown in the darker red color there. And then there's one area highlighted in the box there that we're changing from neighborhood commercial to uptown mixed use, and
So,
might have
yeah,
some more
you
info
should
on
have
that.
gotten an email, I think last week. We met with the property owners of those 3 properties. Currently, they are zone manufacturing, and we're in essence, we're kind of down zoning. We met with him and talked, and he requested that it be included in the uptown mixed use, which gives him a lot more options. Some of what he's looking at is more of the opportunity to maybe do some multifamily or something. So I will be bringing that to the council next Monday, requesting them to, if they are favorable with consensus, to change that in the future land use map. And assuming that they are agreeable, then that would mean the zoning map would need to agree as well. So
What area are we talking about?
on the west side, it's the property with on Meridian, as you're going around the curb, it's 2 little kind of houses and an empty field. There's a cell tower in the very
Up
back.
above, okay.
Yeah, right above,
Next to the trailer place.
thank you. Yes,
Airstream. So.
next to Airstream.
And they want, we've got them at,
We've got him at neighborhood
Center, yeah.
center, and he has requested that it be uptown, which would be, we would just move that line up. It's right next to it. It gives him more options, some higher intensity. So staff has no concerns with that. Like I said, one of his thoughts was just multifamily, which would fit very well with the area. That's the area where he had tried to do like semi-truck parking, and the neighbors were basically did a lot of concerns, and it ended up not passing the hearing examiner due to some of the environmental stuff. So something like multifamily, which would be allowed under the uptown district, would be, I think, a really good fit, or something that is a higher end commercial would also fit because it is off of Meridian.
apartments. Like Alder Ridge. Alder Ridge is right on the back side of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And some townhouses, and yeah, so everything in that kind of darker yellow is multifamily of some sort in most cases.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anjali. Slide 4, I'll just briefly mention, Anjali's going to go through the use table with you later in the meeting. I actually am double booked and have to go to another night meeting for another client later, so trying to make the most of the time we have here. But just a few things to note. We've added in the new zoning districts. We've consolidated like uses. We have a new chart format that's color-coded to the districts, which is nice. Removal of obsolete uses and reorganization to separate accessory uses in a different part of the table. So yeah, again, you'll go over that more detail a little bit later. And now we'd like to go to slide 5, which is the intro to the land development dimensional standards. So this table addresses all of the zoning districts. There's some changes to density to cohere with the comprehensive plan growth targets and what we discussed. There is also a requirement, although it's not spelled out necessarily how much of a bonus needs to be provided, but cities are required to allow some sort of density bonus on parcels owned by religious organizations as a way to spur affordable housing. That's a density bonus just for affordable housing. And then the density lot requirements, which come out of HB 1110, which is the middle housing bill. And so we'll go over those now on slide 6. So a couple things to note. We have not changed, I think, across all the districts, the minimum lot area. So we've kept that as the same. And as you'll recall from some of the information we presented that looked at how middle housing would be added to existing parcels and neighborhoods in Milton, that there are already a variety of lot sizes that exist. Some of those are smaller than what's prescribed in zoning, and the middle housing requirements apply per lot. So there is some, variation in terms of how dense those areas will become. So this is the existing one, just to kind of point out a few things. Another thing to note is there's a maximum net density that's listed in the second to the bottom row. And in some cases, we've removed that in favor of the units per lot requirement in HB 1110. So we'll show you how that works in a moment. So that's existing. Now we'll go to the new one. So changes are noted in the underlined, and in the cases where we have a new district like Uptown Mixed Use, everything is underlined because it's all new. And those density requirements or limits come from the comprehensive plan and what we had assumed in the model, so no real big changes there. A couple other things. So maximum net density, you'll notice in the RS and the RMD, we've gone from a units per acre to a dwelling units per lot. So if you have a 20,000 square foot lot or you have an 8,000 square foot lot, you get the same number of units. Now, if your lot is larger than twice the minimum lot size, you could then subdivide and then add another 3 lots, but
3 units.
3 units, sorry. Not lots, 3 units. And so in that case, if you have a lot that is between the minimum and twice the minimum, you're still going to get the same number of units. So it doesn't scale with the size of the lot. That's really important to note. So in order to maximize the density, people have to do subdivisions for certain size lots. So that's just kind of the basics of how it will work, but it's relatively similar to what you have today. The religious organization density bonus. Oop, sorry, didn't see you.
I'm sorry. The religious organization, did we talk about that before?
Nope.
Is this a new requirement?
It came a couple years ago, but a lot of cities have not implemented it.
That one, okay, it's
Yeah.
one that was, I know which one I'm talking
Yeah.
about, okay.
Yep, good question. So we're bringing that forward because it is a requirement. A couple of things to note. As I said earlier, there's no real prescriptive amount of a density bonus. And how the density bonus will work will depend quite a bit on where the parcel is located, right? So if it's located in, say, Uptown, where we're already allowing multifamily, the density bonus in raw numbers, while higher, as a percentage, depending on how big of the site it is, it's sort of less impactful. For other locations, again, it will depend on the location of the lot, the districts it's in, but we have sort of scaled it based on the intensity of the district that it's in. So for example, in an RS district, they could put 3 units on a lot, and with the bonus, they could put 5 units. But that lot could be, 20, 30 acres in size. So, again, they would have to subdivide potentially to maximize the number of units, but the bonus is basically could be a relatively minor increase depending on the type of the parcel and configuration and zone that it's within. And this would only be for affordable housing. Yep.
Okay, that's the RCW at 35A. When they talked about increased density for the affordable housing, does it mean property that could have the church on it itself, or is it property owned by them that they're doing for middle income, and excuse my voice, middle income housing?
Well, it has to be for affordable housing, so it would have to be sort of,
meant affordable,
income
I'm
restricted
sorry.
and so on and so forth. I believe the bill is written is parcels owned by a religious organization, so most likely that would include a church, but it doesn't have to.
It could be a
Is-
school property.
Yeah.
Or it could be
A religious school,
a religious school.
and it could be like Surprise Lake area, the spiritualist church up there, okay, which they have housing. It's a church-owned property, and so it's equivalent to what that parcel is like. Okay, thank you.
Can we go to Commissioner Boyle? I
thank
saw
you.
your hand up.
I understand the bonus dwelling units. It helps us out with our numbers for affordable housing, correct? With regard to the religious organization. But what I want to know is where's the definition of a religious organization? What minimum do they have? Is there some kind of something, how do you define a religious organization versus a fraternity or something like that?
They've created one.
Yeah, there is a specific definition for religious organization that the state has given us. I can pull it up.
It's a good question, though.
It's in our comp plan? It will be in our comp plan,
It will be in the code.
or it's in our code?
It
Yeah,
will be.
well, if it's not in there or needs to be updated, we'll be adding it in. So there's a definition, I believe, defined in the bill, so
Here, let me pull it.
Sarah's going to pull that up.
I don't need to hear it as long as there's one there.
Okay.
But I think that's a good note just for upcoming things, making sure we've got religious organizations defined. But then we also have something about community church and big church that we just kind of have.
So, yes, so
Those two don't.
we currently have a
definitions
religious institution definition,
don't- Okay.
but they will be also adding a religious organization definition. So we'll actually end up with both.
Okay. That's the other thing is if they can share or
The
something.
definition is in RCW 35A-21-360
Okay.
by the state.
Religious organization means the federally protected practice of a recognized religious assembly, school, or institution that owns or controls real property. So it's a pretty limited definition.
Okay. Just because this probably is new information, if it's okay, I'll just go around for a round of questioning.
Sure.
Commissioner Zaro, do you have any since we're? Okay. Working to Commissioner Whalen.
Just looking at our comprehensive plan, and the printout I have is around June, and looking at how the various future land use designations were described with density at number of dwelling units per acre, and now we're talking dwelling units per lot, and there isn't anything in here about dwelling units per acre. Is there something that can make a correspondence? Should they stay very separate because a future land use designation is an umbrella term for a certain area, and there can be many different subsets under it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, partially in the comp plan, we were referencing some of the existing densities, and now that the state has gone to units per lot, it really depends, right? So I still think using the units per acre as a guide, for what's typical still makes sense because you can't really define it. If you assume that the incentive is for people to develop on the smallest lot possible, because that's the most efficient, we know what that maximum density is. And then there are cases where there's existing smaller lots that would be more dense. So I think it's as best aligned as it can be. It's just that the numbers and systems have changed. That makes it difficult to give it a units per acre number. Yeah.
May I ask another?
Yeah,
In our materials, for the item that was going to talk about the uses, there's a difference in the way the districts are called. It's called, so the suggestion is to just get all the names the same. For example, you said RS was going to become R1, but I'm seeing RS on this chart, so if there's some way to really,
Some of that was, yeah, it's, some of that came out of conversations that we've been having, so it is in flux. And I actually had, I think, an R1 and an R2 instead of R1 and R2. So yes, we will make sure by the time we get to the draft versions that we've agreed on it across.
right.
So,
Yep, good point.
And would it be, I would personally say it would be helpful to have those future land use designations on a row higher than the zoning designations, just so there's a correspondent, which is just like what was done in the land use chart that was presented.
That is in the final code. There wasn't enough space to have it fit here, but it will be.
Okay. And the other thing is, just seeing it tonight, it's kind of challenging to give you good feedback. Will there be a timeline for sending further comments in, is my last question.
so tonight, they're just trying to get some initial feedback and thoughts. I would, middle to end, you're hoping in a week or so to actually put this, I mean, they have it in a draft form, but to get you the actually code language that then you can look at for a couple of weeks prior to the next meeting to discuss and bring back suggestions, comments, that kind of stuff. So trying to I think tonight is trying to zero in on what we think are the important topics that are more, that need to be highlighted, and then we will bring back it in the regular text language. So they're going to be at a conference, so if you have comments by the end of the week and you want to forward them to me, I can forward them to them before they start working on, I don't see you doing any of this work in the next couple days.
Yeah. I mean, with code work, right, you get into a lot more details. So if we need to have a one-on-one conversation, we need to respond to some stuff via email, like that stuff's all very normal. We've just found that it's very helpful for us to come and give a presentation and introduce the sort of framework for the code and what we were thinking, rather than give you like 100 pages of strike draft, and then you're kind of like, well, why is this in here? I don't get this. And we'll do that, next week. But so that was our purpose, and then you'll have plenty of time looking at it. So again, if you have more poignant questions, it's hard to be able to answer all of those in a public meeting. So it's very common for us to respond via email and whatnot. And of course, that can get shared with everyone as well.
I'm sorry, there were two more questions that popped into my head, just very briefly. On page 7, in the RM zoning district, that is not using the same template of dwelling units per lot. Could you just talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so in that one, because so in the single family districts, right, when you restrict it to 3 units per lot, you get like every development's going to be fairly small scale, right? It's going to be sort of like single family, but it could have multiple units, right? It's not going to be a project on 10 acres, right? In the RM district, the difference there is that allows multifamily. So the multifamily projects tend to be on bigger lots and are projects that are not permitted in the R1 or what will be the R1 and the R2. So therefore, for that district, it made sense to just keep the 18 units per dwelling unit, because if we went with the units per lot, you wouldn't really be able to develop multifamily. So it's essentially kind of keeping that zone as it is, because it was already in compliance with a lot of the HB 1110 requirements.
And the last thing is a summary, a brief summary or an update on the descriptions of each future land use designation as well as the zoning district would be kind of handy too.
Yeah.
If there's some summary
We
for
have a little
future.
flow chart thing that we've done that shows like the future land use categories and which zoning they can feed to. And in many cases, it's 1-to-1, but there are some where there's 3. And I think if we did that and had the names correct, and maybe we could even put that in the code, you know, potentially there's a spot, or just put it online. So yeah, we can do that.
Or some kind of summary about what the intent is. This is
Yeah.
primarily
Well,
single-family
and
zone,
that
this is
is in
primarily
each-
multi.
For each zoning district that's in the code, there's a
Okay.
section that updates like the purpose of the zone and what the desire is of the community in that area. And then we've refined some of them, but then we've also added the new ones for the districts that didn't exist before.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Sweat, any comments or questions?
No.
Okay, perfect. We'll allow you to keep going.
Okay. So next, we're moving on to 8, which is the bulk standards update. So this now gets into things like setbacks and heights, things like that. So we've added it in the new zoning districts, same table format. One thing we've added in to address sort of the scale of new development, particularly on the example I provided just a moment ago of developments on larger lots, where if you were just relying on your existing standards, you might get buildings that are maybe of a scale that would not fit in. So one thing we're proposing is putting in a maximum building footprint. So again, on larger projects, you can have multiple buildings. It doesn't really impact the amount of square footage you can build. It just does it at a scale that I think fits in better in those neighborhoods. And then we're proposing,
Jeff, can I just
Yeah.
make sure that I'm clear and they're clear? So from building footprint, it's for each individual building, correct?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
So if you were in the multifamily, you could have three,
Yeah,
4,000 square foot buildings, but it keeps the scale down from one, you can't have one 8,000 square foot building. Okay.
exactly. And then you get whatever the height is above that. So again, looking for your feedback on that, but that's one option to introduce a way to control some of the bulk and scale. And then one thing we're proposing, I think just in the mixed-use town center, is a maximum setback, so we can kind of have a nice presence of the building on the street and try to put parking behind the building where it's feasible. So these are the existing things that you regulate. So again, height, I don't think we're making many changes to height. Maximum building coverage, maximum net or phased floor area. So that's a floor to area ratio, which is the amount of built square footage to the size of the lot. That's something you have existing. We're making a couple recommendations on that. And then you have minimum setbacks, which is standard, but oftentimes cities will have a maximum setback too, or a setback range, a minimum and a maximum. Because, even though you may want a minimum setback, then having a giant setback, may not be the best thing in all instances, particularly if that's a large parking lot between the building and the street. And I think that's it in terms of the summary. Now we'll go of the existing. Let's go to slide 10. So no significant changes on the maximum height. We're proposing a 45-foot height in the uptown, but that's the same as the business, which was the previous zone in that area. So the maximum footprint you can see is a new standard, and it scales by district. So it's 3,000 in the small, lower density districts, 4,000 in the mixed use, or the residential multifamily, 7,000 in the town center, which based on looking at existing development seems reasonable. We did not propose it in the uptown mixed use or the business district. It's something you could maybe look at as part of the sub-area planning process, but we didn't want to preclude large format developments like grocery stores and things that we know are important to the community. So we didn't propose anything there. And then the neighborhood commercial one at 8,000 square feet, seems to fit with what's out there today, and I think gives enough flexibility. In some cases, they may, even with these building footprints, depending on the size of the lot and other parameters, they may max out their maximum floor to area ratio, which is the next standard down. So we think it's reasonable. We're proposing a maximum setback from for just the principal structure in the town center and the neighborhood commercial. Again, gives a nice street frontage and accessibility for pedestrians and bicyclists. To the extent that we can put parking behind the building, I think that works great, both for the business and for kind of the streetscape. So that's one change that we're proposing. And then most of the setbacks we're not changing. We're just adding in setbacks for the new districts, which I think are pretty consistent with what you have existing. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions and comments.
Yes, we'll go ahead and start on Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. So RS was the residential, RMD is residential, and RM is residential. On the maximum setback from right-of-way for principal structure, which could be 3,000 square feet in size if it's a lot, correct? That means it can be right on the easement? Is that what that, with the N8, is that what that implies?
No, that just means that the standard setbacks apply. And
By what?
That just means that the standard setbacks apply. So we're not proposing a maximum for those districts. Therefore, they would just have to comply with the minimum front yard setback, which.
So they have, it's the same as now. They have to be 20 feet back. But if they want to be 50 feet back, we don't care
Yeah.
in those zones.
Whereas in the uptown mixed use, there's no setback. It can be right on the right-of-way line. And we're just saying, have it be between 0 and 10. Don't set it back 50 feet and have a big parking lot. So we think that works. And of course, the existing structures and things would be exempt and wouldn't have any issue with modifications. Okay. Any other questions on that one?
Yes, Commissioner Whalen?
Just a question on floor area ratio and the idea of introducing it in the R1 or the RS zone, the RMD zone, as you've got them labeled, or even the multifamily, the RM.
Adding,
Could you, the phased floor
Yeah.
/ lot ratio? Because you mentioned something about reducing bulk.
yeah.
Yeah,
that is definitely another tool, and that is one that we have used for some of our other clients that were working on middle housing zoning. The reason why we didn't propose it there is because with a maximum allowance of 3 units per lot, you know that the projects are you're not gonna have larger projects on larger lots where the issue of floor to area ratio would become a bigger issue. So when you're talking about 3 units on on like an 8,000 or even a 4,000 square foot lot, you have the building footprint, which will control the size of it. You also have a maximum building coverage. And so we think those are probably okay to control the bulk and scale, and certainly wouldn't be different than you have today. And the maximum building footprint is a new standard. So we think that those measures address it, but it's certainly something you could consider.
Okay.
We'd have to do some testing just to figure out if it would actually make sense, or if the other controls already would address the issue, which we haven't done.
Okay.
Yes.
So a question was just maximum building coverage. How does that integrate with maximum building footprint?
Yeah.
Was a question that popped into mind.
Okay.
Just how does that work? And if there isn't time to
Yeah, so let's say that you have a 10,000 square foot lot and you want to develop 3 units. The building coverage limit would say that you could cover 4,000 square feet of your lot, but the maximum footprint of any individual building would be 3,000. So therefore, in that case, the footprint is requiring a smaller sort of scale building than the rest of the standards would otherwise allow. And if you had an even larger lot, 12,000 square feet, if you only rely on the building coverage percentage, then it just gets bigger and bigger, whereas the building footprint caps it at 3,000.
Okay. Another question on how that math works. It's maximum building coverage per, just assume in your example, 10,000 square foot lot could have 3 dwelling units, and someone says, well, I want to do a small house and 2 ADUs, and they're all going to be detached. Are setbacks, will the setbacks that are listed on the prior page, will they apply to each of those 3 detached buildings? And then, meaning from one another as well, or is that another type of setback? Or does the fire code say you got to have a
Yeah,
minimum
the
distance
fire
between?
code would address that separation and deals with openings and proximity to buildings. That is something we could put in place, but I don't think in this context it's necessary because the building code addresses that.
Okay, so the setbacks basically are the lot,
Yes.
you move in from your 4 setbacks or more if there's more lines, and that's your building envelope. And a building footprint is not the roof drip line, correct? It's the foundation, the perimeter of the foundation. Is that what a building, maybe we just need to define it.
Yeah.
That's
But-
usually how I do define it, just because it's easier, because people's eaves can change. So when possible, I stick footprint to the actual like foundation.
And does it include permitted, like decks and stuff that's outside the
The way
building
our
footprint?
current definition, I believe, of building coverage is also decks and patios
Okay,
and sheds and everything, so.
okay,
For building coverage, but I think for building footprint, I would suggest
Correct.
not counting that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Not for the tax assessor.
well, that's why I was thinking his tax successor always puts it on, so
Yeah.
I was like, is that your building footprint or not?
Decks and patios.
Yeah,
Yeah, so for the example of if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, you could build on it, you would have 4,000 square feet to build on it. Well, if you took, you could do a 2,000 primary home and 2 1,000 ADUs, but then you're not putting up any other sheds, you're not putting up, so if you want to have decks and patios, those shrink as well.
Okay.
So you have to fit all of those within both, again, they all apply, whatever's, one doesn't override the other, you have to make them all mix.
Carport apply?
Yes, a carport is a structure or a building.
And so your max building footprint is applicable, in my example, it would be applicable to each of those dwelling units, the principal dwelling unit and the 2 ADUs. If someone had a big enough lot, the maximum.
Yes.
Well, but then again, our ADU, do we have
Limits to
size
1,000.
limits?
And the state allows us to limit to 1,000. So in the case of like multifamily, if it was big enough and they wanted, they were going to put up 4 apartment buildings, each one of those couldn't be more than 3,000. Even if, assuming that they had the building coverage and all the setbacks to do it. So,
Yeah.
but yes, in the residential, it's not as big of an impact, but it does mean it does control it a little bit.
Another question on, when you mentioned multifamily, it's only 1,000 square foot more in maximum building footprint. So is that an attempt to try to keep apartment complexes to a smaller scale? Or is that what the trend is?
Well,
Or,
and yes, and I think it's also kind of tied to the density. If you're building at 18 units an acre, you don't have to build at a massive scale. In fact, we showed some examples where just some of the middle housing stuff gets to that. sort of scale. So, by minimizing the footprint, you encourage people to build up, which preserves open space, and I think, does have a scale that is of a good quality for Milton. So I don't think it's probably that different than some of the projects that have been out there today. But yeah, that was our thinking, that it would just kind of help the city meet those goals.
And so on the mixed use and the neighborhood commercial, 7,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet for the max building footprint. I think of our town center as being small scale, so 7,000 sounds like it's really big. I guess I have to go to the,
It's a little smaller than the new building that was built across across from the coffee stand there.
It was remodeled.
It's remodeled, yeah. So, I mean, and that's like the largest building that was out there, so,
The Canon Electric,
yeah.
is it Canon Electric with the other?
It's with the little, just
The
the
yarn
renovated
store
part, I think, is probably smaller. So,
okay,
you
and
know.
then neighborhood commercial's going to be even bigger.
well, the
8,000
parcels
square
on
foot.
neighborhood commercial are a little bit bigger and the businesses are different, so that's why we scaled it up a little bit. So, there's not a perfect number, but I think this gives the development community enough ability to develop their property, but ensure that we're not aggregating a number of lots and doing something that's wildly out of scale.
Okay. And on that issue of aggregating lots, you anticipated the next question, I think binding site plan, is that what that is? But
Yeah, could be.
we're back to trying to prevent super large buildings, but if someone's got 2 lots,
Right. I mean, there's a number of ways you can do it. Like we've put in limits on lot size, right? It's like if you go into a historic area and you look at the plat is usually what defines the scale of development. And so if you can preserve that plat, you'll ensure that you're going to preserve some of that scale. That's not something a lot of cities do, but that is one measure. The other measure is what we propose, which is worry less about the lot and more about the buildings. So even though it could be one larger lot with multiple buildings, it would still kind of read the same way, in terms of the scale. So that was the approach that we took for this.
okay. And I guess there's other detailed questions I'll ask later, but I like the idea of the maximum building footprint as a concept in general, and look forward to more detail
Yeah,
later.
yeah. We can come back with a little more information on some of
yeah.
these topics, including, if you want, we could maybe map the religious-owned parcels. Yeah, we've done that for other clients. If you're just curious to see which parcels are existing in existing ownership by religious organizations, we can do that.
And then the maximum setback in the mixed-use district and the neighborhood commercial, that's taking into account things like on-site landscaping plus cars being able to park in front as well as things to the back.
We're trying to get the cars to park in the rear.
Okay.
Would be the preferable. Obviously, existing developments, would do what they continue to do. And 10 feet is a great, is a reasonable distance for landscaping. And again, in the mixed-use district and in the neighborhood, or I guess in the mixed-use district, there was already a 0 setback. So, this is sort of not encouraging, but accommodating something greater than that, but putting some limits on it.
Yeah, I like the idea of the parking to the back as a way to make it more pedestrian
Yeah, yep, exactly.
friendly as well, so thank you.
With the maximum setbacks for right-of-way, the 10 and 15, I know that that's a trend right now as far as moving the parking to the back and stuff like that. Has that been something that the community has stated that we want, or is that just based off of kind of the trends you're seeing?
Well, I think we've heard a lot from the community about wanting it to be safer to walk. And I think having a stronger presence of commercial businesses along the street edge makes it more pedestrian friendly and accessible than having to navigate through parking lots. So I would say it's a combination of a best practice, but I think also is related to some of the input that we've gotten from the community.
Okay, Because, yeah, I guess I think of it of a little opposite. When I'm thinking of that, then it's kind of, a lot of places are looking for one entrance in and out. And so then do you do it on the sidewalk side, the parking side? I just note that it creates some confusion there when it actually gets done. Also, then those buildings are brought forward, and then you start adding your little street signs and stuff like that, and then you're infringing on people's site visibility, or you have more people congregating, like right in on the storefront area. So I just wasn't sure if the going away from the strip mall aesthetic was just a fad, and I didn't want to put ourselves in code for a current fad.
That's a good point.
I'm not sure I would say it's a fad, and I think we were deliberate not to really take that issue on in the areas that truly have the shopping centers.
Okay.
Like, that's why we didn't recommend a building footprint max. We didn't recommend the setback limitation in those
Okay.
areas. But I think, and we could look at some examples, but some of the sites in the neighborhood commercial are already pretty close to what we're proposing. So I think
Okay.
there are some examples there. And certainly, we could write some exceptions if we felt like those were going to become issues like site
Okay.
visibility or turning movements. But the idea here is to minimize the conflicts with pedestrians and have safe and convenient access. So I think this will work, and I don't think it's a fad per se, and I think there's still
Okay.
a lot of code that's supportive of the existing development pattern in those areas.
And I guess I would just
Sorry.
add that both the neighborhood center and the town center, their focus is to serve their immediate neighborhood. So again, that idea of you bringing it forward, it's more pedestrian. There's a more likelihood in those two zones people are walking.
Yeah. I just start
Versus
thinking of it
the-
as like the timeout it starts turning more into like the timeout tavern or something like that, where now your parking's in the back, and then you got people, like police that are driving by, maybe don't have the site visibility if you're moving all your parking in the back, or I don't know. I guess I can see both sides of it, but I wasn't sure if this was something the community was necessarily requesting, or if there was a real benefit of putting it in our rules. But I'm welcome to other feedback. I know Commissioner Boyle.
Very good point brought
Yeah.
up, Chair. Very good point brought up is, I remember it must have been 12 years ago when the last consultants created the Uptown District, and it was designed specifically when you get past Uptown Coffee, and the roadway had, the Albertsons over here on the north side, and then the Safeway on the other side, and they had like a projection of an actual building next where the parking lot is, that where Ranchitos, and that they're on the close to the street, just below that rockery, with a 2-level, and then they had angle parking all along Milton Way. And so, I mean, it's just how 12 years changes,
Yeah.
And so I understand and appreciate your view on the trends.
Yeah.
And I also 100% agree with the security not being, if anybody's parked at Safeway, you're worried about your vehicle when you go into Safeway. I don't care what time of day or night it is. And to have it behind a building where security and people, I mean, Safeway doesn't have security
Yeah.
in their parking lot. So I could see where that would be a concern.
Yeah.
And also, we've got all these smash and grabs. Wouldn't that make it easy when it's right off the right of way to just smash your car in there and grab all the stuff out and take off?
Yeah.
But that's a little extreme, but
Yeah.
I understand. I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to take away the option of if it makes sense to have the storefront on the sidewalk side. I just don't want to say that you can't have your parking in front, because when I start thinking of a lot of our community and trying to tie in and blend it all with what's already there, I think of something like Cannon Electric has, at least a pull-through, one-way parking, and then if, gosh, trucks just keep getting bigger and bigger, so that's what I'd start thinking of.
Just a couple things to note.
Yeah.
In the drawings for Uptown, I'm assuming the angled parking was actually on-street parking. And
Yes.
that's great. We're not saying don't do that. We're just saying for parking that's off-street. And I think you mentioned Uptown Coffee. That's a perfect example.
Right.
That is on the street and parking's on the side, which also parking could be on the side. It just says the building has to be up there. So if you have a wider lot. But, I think Uptown Coffee is really nice, and that's the kind of neighborhood amenities. So we're
But
not
is
making
the
any changes to the shopping centers.
Yeah.
We're not having people park behind Safeway. That's not what we're proposing. We're just proposing that the building not have a parking lot in front of it for the neighborhood commercial and the Uptown, which is consistent with some of the development that's already out there,
And
particularly
is Sherwin-Williams, is that considered
It's
that zone,
not.
and would
It was
that
on-
fall? That's just outside of it?
So Sherwin-Williams, yeah, the cutoff is Uptown Coffee. I guess you were kind of just asking of the theory behind it and everything.
Yeah.
Some of it is that if you have those storefronts up close, people can, you can see what's inside of them better. In some ways, it's better for them advertising wise because you'll see the merchandise, or if it's a restaurant, you can see people. So there's give and take. Yes, if you're just like, oh man, I just want to run in and grab one thing, it seems like, oh, I got to go in the back and now I got to come around. Not that they couldn't have entrances. Some of places have entrances front and back. But if it's a restaurant or something, there's no,
Yeah.
you can go in the back and come in on the side. And so
Yeah, I
there's
just
pluses
think
and
like-
minuses.
Yeah, all the antique shops and all that, I don't know. Yeah. Commissioner Johnson?
All right, so when we look at where old, at the corner of Meridian and Milton Way, Hollywood Video up there, I mean, I see so many designs now where we have the buildings right at the sidewalk for mobility for people. So, and we have the shopping centers, which I see different. There's just two different types of building that a shopping center is required, I think, to have their stuff anywhere. But the corner there, if we do this, that would mean that building would have to be, which I think would be appropriate to have and I'm sorry about my voice, to have them up with that right at the sidewalk and people go in. And then I ask about, well, we've got the zoning where you have the business down below and residential up there. Aren't they going to be at the sidewalk and parking behind it? So I'm seeing two different things. I see a shopping center, it's totally different. It's traditionally big parking, where the other places aren't big parking that would be up. And so,
Yeah, I think that was a great summary of what we were approaching. I mean, there are certainly cities that are even taking on the shopping centers and looking at other typologies for redevelopment, but that's a future conversation if you go through the sub-area planning process. So we're only proposing it in 2 areas, and we feel like there's examples of that already in the community that are working successfully.
Okay, yeah, I can be mute on this going forward. It's just one of those that my observation, what I've seen, and I don't like the idea of restricting businesses if it's not necessary. And so that's where I was coming from, is I don't like the idea of putting a maximum on here if it's not necessary. But if that is a very strong recommendation, it is something that can be changed.
And after clarifying with the angle parking and remembering what the intent of the original Uptown District, and it seems like this is keeping with that tradition with the
Yeah.
buildings up close, I 100% agree
Okay.
with that. So,
Yeah,
Okay.
and we'll write some additional language to also make it clear that you can have parking on the side of the building too. It's really, like, I think the coffee shop's just a great example. It's got a nice presence, but you can still see the parking and it's visible. And
Okay.
so,
Great.
yeah, we don't certainly want to propose anything that's not going to be successful.
Yeah. And I apologize. One more, Commissioner Whalen?
Just a super quick thing, the Uptown is the UMX, and that doesn't have a maximum setback
Right.
allowance for the right-of-way. I thought I heard some people saying they were anticipating that there was.
I'd
Did
have
I
to look in-
misunderstand?
It doesn't here. I'll have to double check unless you guys went through it. We have the Uptown Design Districts, which I agree, that's the vision that gives. So I need to look and see if it's a requirement in there or just a suggestion in there.
Yeah, let's do that together. I mean, it certainly is moving towards that direction, how prescriptive it is. And, you know, the other fact is you have some very large properties that already have large surface parking lots, and so
It would only be if they
redevelop may not be, you know, significant. But yeah, we'll take a look at those
Yeah.
as well.
And the other
Appreciate
tag,
those comments. We'll come back with some other examples we can talk through on some of these things.
another tag along, I'm sorry, and what's on my mind is just, when looking at that proposed zoning map, you can see that the neighborhood center is sprinkled in various areas throughout the city. So that is an area that's being proposed to have that maximum setback consideration. So just wanted to point that out as I was trying to think, now, where is this happening? And the other thing is road widening. That's another thing to consider if somebody's right up at a corner and roads get widened. So there's pros and cons on all kinds of things, but I can see, I appreciate the comments earlier about, do things look safe, and do people feel safe? And so anticipating smaller sized businesses and thinking if there's going to be parking around back, that's going to mean they have a driveway alongside them, so buildings are being separated. So it's got a lot of repercussions, so maybe it's something worth thinking or giving more examples about.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great, continue on.
Okay. Move on to everyone's favorite topic, parking. So a couple things to note here. There is a Senate Bill 6015, which is related to parking requirements. There's also some parking limitations within HB 1110, the Middle Housing Bill, and the ADU bill. And both of those say that for lots that are under 6,000 square feet, the city can require no more than one parking stall per unit. If the lot is larger than 6,000 square feet, the city can require, I think, no more than 2 stalls per unit. And, you know, parking is an interesting thing. And I think one of the things that's important to consider is that parking requirements typically only dictate how much parking is built if it's higher than what people would already want to provide. One of the projects that I did about 10 years ago was called the Right Size Parking Project, and it was a large research effort by King County to look at parking demand around sites in King County. And it basically created this website that you can go to, and this statistical model and mapping that can predict actual parking demand based on different inputs. And one of the big findings was that on average at the time in the King County area, multifamily projects were building 0.4 stalls more than what was being used. And the repercussions of that are more expense, more impacts to the environment, higher housing costs, so on and so forth. So as part of that project, we developed a toolkit to advise cities on how they could look at their parking requirements. And we recommended a couple of different options. One was called the right size approach, where you try to set your parking requirements generally with what you think the demand is so that they're not higher. The other approach is called, and there's sort of a hybrid option, is called a market-based approach, where you let the market sort of determine how much parking is going to get built. There are a lot of sort of baked-in requirements for parking within the development kind of system. Financing will often require it. Developers will often, of course, build it because they need it to market their properties, right? And so they're good at figuring out, you know, what is needed. And so it's important to remember that whatever you set the requirement at, people are in many cases likely to build more than that. And I think the best example of that locally is that for, I think, a single family home, you have to build 2 parking stalls. If you drive around the neighborhood, most have many more than that. They might have 6 parking stalls, they might have 4. And so whatever we set the requirement at will also impact the cost and ability to produce things like ADUs and other smaller units that address local housing needs. So just as a guide, we went and looked at the right-size parking model for the portion of Milton, and it was a little bit higher than 1, I think was the requirement, was like 1.2 or 1.3. And that's looking just at the area in Milton that is mostly single family. What we're recommending is to consider a requirement of 1 stall per unit. You could vary this based on the unit type, but I think a couple things are coming into mind. If we set it, well, 1, for lots smaller than 6,000 square feet, we have to have that as a requirement. We can't require any more. And I don't know as there's really an increase in demand that comes with a larger lot per se. So there's sort of a fair kind of issue there. The other thing is that when folks are going to add like an ADU, let's say you have a single family home and you have 2 parking stalls at your house and you want to build an ADU for a family member, the code would tell you that you have to go and pave part of your lot to build a parking space, but that unit could be for someone in your family. You might not have any need for it. And so if it's 1 per unit, you could add that unit without, having to add a parking stall. On the flip side, if you have 2 parking stalls and the requirement is 1, and you want to add an ADU and you're going to lease that out and you need parking, you're going to decide to build that parking if there's no other option that's out there. So I think people are going to build what makes sense. And I think, erring a little bit on a lower requirement while still requiring that every unit have 1 parking stall feels like a balance to me. And I think it would avoid the situation where the city's requiring more parking than maybe someone would need for their particular situation. So it's a bit of a property rights issue, and I think the risks are pretty minimal, understanding that, parking requirements are always a sensitive topic. So we want to just put that out there for discussion and see what your thoughts are on that.
The most passionate about parking, yes.
I don't know if I should answer this tonight. That way my mind is. I'm tired of the state enforcing stuff on us. You can walk around this neighborhood and you can see multiple cars parked in the front yards, in the backyards. It doesn't matter because we've become a city of families living together because they can't afford to rent. Now, maybe this will change in the future. I doubt it. I'm very pessimistic tonight, so I apologize up front. But I understand the logic, and I understand the logic about Seattle because we have to remember this city years ago didn't accept the money from the federal government for mass transport, for a metro. So people use their cars. They've been used to it. And also there's this drive to get rid of cars, but we really don't have mass transportation yet. So I don't totally agree with this. I understand the process for it. I have a problem with it. I think too, we just see them piled up on the yards. So what do we do?
It's a good point, but I think even in that situation, the parking requirements have nothing to do with that. Because if people have 6 cars at their house, that's well more than they're required to have for parking, and it would be the same issue whether the requirement was
you're
one or
smart.
not. That's the part where it's, again, the outcomes don't follow the
Okay,
requirements.
so in that case then, what we have to do, if we go 1 parking stall per unit, there is no parking on any part of the easement because, however, I as the owner of the easement have to take care of that easement. So why can't I park my car there?
The easement,
In the front of.
The right of way, and that's a
right-of-way,
whole nother,
not the easement,
that's a
right-of-way.
discussion that
Well-
unfortunately doesn't fall here because that's you can park.
We'd have to tie them together.
I
Yeah.
think you can tie them together, and I think what you could do is if you had a minimum set of standards and someone improved it to add on-street parking, then they could maybe get some credit for it, potentially. If you wanted to sort of formalize that.
Okay, one other question.
Okay.
1 unit one stall unit per unit. Okay, so for your House Bill 1042, it says units added within an existing building do not require additional parking. Now, that doesn't mean a house, that we're talking like maybe a duplex or multi-housing on that House Bill 1042?
Yeah, like you have your existing house and you're converting your garage or like a bedroom to a unit or something, yeah, within a structure. That is true. That's a separate thing that we can't do regardless, but yes, that does come into play.
Okay, because all I could envision is somebody having a small duplex and then saying, oh, let's divide the duplex into a fourplex. They're smaller, like we see in Europe and other places. The rooms, the housing units get smaller and smaller within a building. So instead of having two, I'm just thinking, do you understand where I'm going on this? I hope. So,
Yeah,
and so they go to four. Now, they'd have to get the approval from planning to do
and-
that adjustment.
And they wouldn't be allowed in the R1 or the R2 to have 4 units. They could only have 3. So
Okay,
they wouldn't be
three,
allowed to do that.
but we're still allowing only one parking, so the 3 individuals.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's it.
yeah, but that's a good example, but in that example, our hands are kind of tied. And I think but it also follows some of the logic, like, one hand, I understand why they're putting that in place, but on the other hand, it doesn't really matter whether the unit was carved out of the existing building or added. I mean, what if someone comes in and gets a permit for a building and then comes back a year later and divides it into another unit? It doesn't have to build a parking requirement.
When I would say, again, a little bit, like right now, we require 2 for a single family. In most cases, they're building double 2-car garages and a driveway because we have the setback. So in essence, they're being built with 4 car spots, but we only require 2. So again, is where that kind of, the other things in the market come in. Is there 1 or 2 choice houses that may try to save a buck? Yes. The vast majority are going to still have their 2-car garages and their driveway.
Okay, the question though is if we're saying 1 park stall per unit and they actually want to bid in 3, then the pavement takes away from the building of the structure or the size of the lot. Wouldn't it?
Well, yes and no. It could. Let's just say it could. But you probably could mitigate it by building maybe taller or something. But yes, theoretically it could.
Continue around. Anyone else this side? Comments?
Yeah,
Commissioner
I'd like
Boyle.
to see some kind of survey or an audit on, first of all, how many vehicles per household is average in Milton? And also, let's start snooping around some garages and see who can actually park a vehicle in their garage. I bet there's 20%. I would put money on it that 20% of the garages in Milton are actually, you could park a vehicle in there, open the doors, get out, shut the door, and go inside. I bet it's 20. Let's do you. Can you pull in your garage?
Yes.
You can?
I
I can in mine. You?
I don't have a garage.
Okay.
2 cars in my 2-car garage.
What the heck? I lost already.
Yeah,
And an e-bike.
I can park an e-bike. And a horse.
Unfortunately, in
Mine
my
was made for
neighborhood, that's
horses.
not the case. And they spill out into the right of way and it's everyone else's eyesore and everybody else's problem. When we all pay the taxes on it, all of us, and they get to use all the space. So, it's again, one of my pet peeves, and I would like to see the maximum allowable for parking. Instead of lowering it, I'd rather raise it. And then they can all do what I did. I created 12 parking stalls in my driveway so you could get in and out with as many vehicles as you wanted. And I pay the additional impervious surface stormwater fees, the maximum in the city. The 41, I'm at 41%, so that put me over the deal. So, I consider it a pay to park thing, and that's how my property is. I can get in and out easily, you can have friends over, and my stuff doesn't spill out into the streets.
Commissioner Sarah?
I'm good, thank you.
You're not going to
knows
go into
my
that one.
garage.
For me, there's a little bit of, I get your logic where you're trying to figure out, like, if you even put in the code, how much of that's even going to be enforced and how much is that really going to help what you're actually observing. With that said, I'd still almost prefer if it was like, you need a parking stall for every 1,000 square feet or something like that. So if it's a 3,000 square foot home, you need 3 parking spots. If it's an ADU, or either that or 2 for the
Well,
primary structure and 1 for each additional dwelling unit or something like that would be my wish list. I don't know how feasible that is, but
okay. I mean, I
yeah.
think, you know, if there's some hesitancy for the 1 per unit, what I would recommend is maybe something higher for the single family, as you just suggested.
yeah,
Maybe 1 stall per unit, you know, once they add a second or third unit.
yeah,
What's that?
okay.
Well, for ADUs, but not if they did a duplex. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so we could come up, because, I mean, everyone's building 2 stalls with a single family home, I would have to
Yeah.
imagine. And it, you know, if we actually did a survey, what we would find on aggregate, I'm pretty sure, is that there'd be way more parking than is required.
Yeah,
Obviously, that parking's not all shared, it's on individual
Mhm.
lots, but I'm fairly confident that's what it would show. But yeah, I think if you wanted to put in something that was consistent for the single family and then provide some flexibility for the additional unit, that would be a, you know, pretty good middle ground.
just because Milton's demographic is a bit more of, even if I'm just going to, you know, the tavern, I'm still driving there.
Yeah.
You know, we just don't have a whole lot of walkable
Yeah, and
And
but I
then-
think that's where I'm not
and a lot of
suggesting
transit. Yeah,
that. I'm just suggesting that people will figure out how to build, like
Yeah.
Mr. Boyle, they'll
Yeah.
figure out how much parking they need and build it regardless of what the
yeah.
code says.
You would think, but they were all parking on the right of way, and then we took it away, and they started parking. Well, they stopped.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
that,
but-
that's a
but
whole nother issue
yeah,
that's not solved by
yeah,
us because
yeah.
it's right of way
Mhm.
and we don't have official street parking, but we do park and
Yeah, we're
that's
just
a whole
not-
nother mess that makes my head hurt when I have to do.
Yeah, we're just not.
When the police
a-
department tells me it's my problem and I tell them it's theirs, so.
Yeah, we're just not.
That way for 20 years.
And it's,
Yeah.
Pass the buck. I was told it was Public Works for a while.
Oh, okay.
So
We're just not an area that does a lot of street parking or providing, or, you know, like Tacoma will do, you know, street parking permits or something like that. We just aren't one of those communities. And so we end up battling over whether or not they should be allowed to park on the streets, what's going on. So,
You notice
yeah.
that when we were doing some of the neighborhood analysis for the middle housing, we could take another look at that and certainly could help you try to figure out, you know, how to regulate that in
Okay,
a better way, definitely.
great. That was my comments. Continuing on.
I do agree with the chair's comments on looking for something that's got a little more flexibility to it in addressing additional dwelling units. Again, I can hear this logic, but I can remember being on the commission decades ago, oh, you guys are requiring too much parking, and I think they were being blanket statement in terms of commercial use and residential use. And, you know, when I go to that shopping center on Meridian, I mean, there are times when that lot is full. It's, so to think that people are giving up their cars, I think we wish we could be like what we see in Europe, where it's all pedestrians and it's a cobblestone street. I mean, that's a lovely vision,
Yeah.
but we're not quite there yet.
I think more the issue is just that the government is telling folks how much parking to build, and that may not be the parking that they need. And the regulations, again, through my research, has shown that typically parking requirements require, the issue is when they require more than is what is needed, right? Because a certain amount of parking is going to get built through the discretion of the owners, developers, financiers. You know, undersupplying parking has typically not been the problem. And so if you're serious about environmental issues, you're serious about affordable housing, I would definitely recommend giving it a serious consideration.
I've driven around more urban areas like the Fremont district, and it's just, there's no way you can get cars going in two directions. I don't know how it happens when they're parking all on the street. It's a future I'm looking to forestall. So forcing more parking onto the right-of-way, I have concerns about it. So I guess I need to really think about it. And the other thing is the idea of, okay, it's built and there's one stall per dwelling unit, but that really impacts the next people moving in. And I don't know, and building coverage, we have our standards for max building coverage, but we don't have a standard, or do we? Correct me, Manager Stallnecker, if we have a standard for maximum
We don't.
impervious.
We don't. Which I guess in the case of that, if somebody, if it was built with one and someone comes in and wants two, they can create additional parking. We're not saying it's the maximum number. We're just saying you have to provide one. I would suspect, again, most single family is going to do at least two, if not more, if you count the garage. And like other people, they just park on the grass or whatever to get it off onto their property. And while it may not be the most pleasant to look at, in some ways it does keep us from having higher impervious surface, and the next person may not do that, or their kids may grow up and leave and they don't need to. So again, it's that idea of people will build what they want if we don't have a maximum. But are we forcing them to build more than they need in most cases?
I look at the development where Fife Sand and Gravel used to be. The name of that development escapes me. But you drive around when people are not at work, they're parking on the sidewalk. The development behind Gravity Coffee, I haven't witnessed it myself, but I've heard people describe, that is really crammed roadway because people are parking. So to me, that proves that there's a higher demand for the parking, with one stall per unit being not enough. I'm assuming the development behind Gravity Coffee was at our current standard of 2 parking stalls. So if you've got a new development within the last year and they're building to our, quote, higher standard, and still it's really crammed, yes, it's less expensive, but and I guess it kind of works because it's a cul-de-sac sort of a situation and it's not a drive-through. But I just really I'm really up in the air about this one. Thank you.
I'll give Commissioner Sweatton the opportunity, and then I'll take it to.
I agree with the chair that just saying you need one driveway per unit or one parking spot per unit is ridiculous. It should be, how many single people are living in these houses around this community? Not very many. Okay, I'm sure there's a few, but they have wives, they have kids. Most families are 2 people are working, or you go broke. Where are you going to park your cars if you only got one spot? It's got to be on the road or in the middle of their yard somewhere. So I don't think saying, just one driveway is all you need. It should be a minimum of 2.
Okay.
And even that is not enough in a lot of cases because you have kids. Some of them are still going to school. Some of them are just starting to work. They have their own vehicle. Now you got 3 cars. Maybe you have 2 kids that are in that age. Now you got 4. So
Yeah.
I can't see downgrading the parking other than for the drainage, which I do not agree with, because I got in an argument with our building inspector about that in my own property. So, however you say it, don't limit it to 1. Say, I believe it should be a minimum of 2 spaces per unit. Done deal.
Yeah.
And if you add, EDUs or something like that, then you got to deal with that accordingly.
Okay. Yeah. Commissioner Boyle.
Yeah, just one more thing on this. it's funny that it was brought up about the development behind the post office, is I distinctly remember a traffic study being done or some sort of, and why does it come to my mind 2.4 residents, or it was 2.4 trips per day? It was all based on something. That whole parking for that thing was all based on a study that was done. And I still said that people would be parking wherever they could, and they said it would be, policed by the HOA and this and that. So that's their fodder that they're in, but I agree with what was said at the last statement, is that minimum of two and one for each additional unit. Whether it's a law or not, I guess, or a Senate bill or whatever it is, they'll squash it on us. But
Okay. I think we've voiced that we'd like that increased if there's, yeah. So we want to continue on.
Okay, so we'll come back. I think we got some clear direction. Maybe we'll come back with a few options for you. I think right now it's 2 per unit, right, across all types. So we'll come back with some options. Appreciate the feedback. Just a couple other things to note, some other things that we have to do, which will be included in your draft. We have to update emergency housing regulations to allow the required number of beds. These are all state mandates. Updating the accessory dwelling unit definitions and regulations. We're essentially just complying with the mandates of what's required. We're going to allow, so in the single-family districts, because of the middle housing bill, we'll be allowing duplexes and potentially an ADU for 3 units, or a single family and 2 ADUs. So any combination, but you can only get 3 units total. So the 2 ADUs only come in play if it's a single family. If it's a duplex, then it would just be 1 additional unit. And then the addition of the density bonus for religious organizations, which we discussed earlier. So those will all be included in your code packet, which we'll get out next week.
Okay.
And then we'll follow up with some more options for the parking, and then some of the examples that we talked about for some of the other standards. We'll come back with those as well.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I know you got to jump right onto the next one. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
perfect. Oh, and you've got your
glad
copy
you
set.
brought up parking last. You guys are getting to know us.
Well, it's always good to have the conversation,
Yeah.
regardless of where we land.
You get,
Thank you.
Thank
don't forget
you.
your books.
Yeah. All right,
Oh, our
and then
books, yeah.
as we mentioned, we are going to move agenda item 6B to the end, which will put us into agenda item 6C.
All right, so these are the 4 chapters that are related to permit processing that we have been discussing over the last couple months. We held the public hearing at the last meeting. Staff is recommending that we move these on to the city council. So the first one is site plan approval. The red line version is presented. I don't believe there was any major changes since the last meeting.
Do we need a motion if we're making a recommendation or no?
Yes.
Yep, and it's written right underneath the type of action.
Page 35. 35.
Would you like to?
I move to recommend to the city council a draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.62, site plan approval.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.62, site plan approval. That's been seconded. All those in favor, let's open it up for discussion first. We can move it to, yes.
Could Manager Solnecker just review or summary, the changes,
Yeah.
highlight, I guess is the word.
So the major changes in the site plan approval section is that on page 37, we are, strangely enough, I'm decreasing the dwelling units from 4 to 5 to qualify for a minor site plan, increasing non-residential construction from 2,000 to 4,000, and additions, changing it from 5,000 square feet impervious to 20 automobile parking spaces or the equivalent in impervious surface, as that matches basically the divide between minor and major. I'm using the SEPA thresholds when they're required to do a SEPA checklist as that dividing mark. So again, so then for major site plan, if you're over 4 dwelling units, over 4,000 square feet, or over 20 automobile parking spaces or the equivalent, and emergency houses will stay there. Then the other change is that, which will be, it's in this one and it's also reflected in the processing table, is that we're downgrading minor site plans. They're both will be, both minor and major will be staff level, and that the major site plans will no longer require a neighborhood meeting unless it's requested. It will not require a public hearing. It will require notice to 500 feet and a comment period so that neighbors, one, they're informed, two, they will have a chance to input. And then we've also, but with that, we have increased the specific criteria that they have to address. So the idea being that with site plans, we have specific criteria. If they meet their criteria, and it's a permitted allowed use, then it just needs to, that's what they're required to do. And so we've added noise and pollution impacts are buffered in mitigation. We've increased the requirements on lighting. We've added that there needs to be safe pedestrian connections, appropriate bicycle storage. Yeah, so we've increased those, and then just sort of clarified how the timelines work, because I felt the previous language was a little cumbersome.
Yes, Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. I have a question regarding notice. If a minor site plan, I thought I heard that there would be notice required.
There's notice required for major site plans.
Major site
Yep.
plans. Okay. And could you remind us again about the citizen portal? Because I've noticed that not all permit applications are posted on the portal.
They should be.
They're not. And the portal also says land use types, I want to say 3 and 4 are on the portal. So there seems to be
All land use, they may not show up on the map. So all building permits, land use permits, civil permits, and I believe all public works right-of-way permits should all be in the portal because they're all in our permit track system. They're only showed on the map if they are, I think, inactive or there's a certain status that puts them on the map. But you should be able, in the search category, to search for any by address or permit number. You should be able to search for anything, whether it is active, approved, in the middle of whatever. So if you're finding something that's not there, then I need to find out if that's a glitch in the system. So the only thing that's not right now is we don't do, the compliance isn't shown, but I believe everything else should be. And if there isn't, then we'll need to address that.
Yeah, Commissioner Jeff.
Portal right now. I'm on the page, and on 2024 for land use notices, is that what you're asking about?
well, the portal and it doesn't seem to be showing all the applications when I go to to me, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but it just seems to me that for a citizen to be able to know what's going on, notice is an important thing, and only process type 3 has that 500-foot notice. I don't know when the yellow sign has to get hammered into the ground, but I have trouble, while there's a lot of things that have been improved, I have trouble with more going administrative and less people being able to know what's going on to at least make a comment or ask a question, which sometimes, and I know from direct experience,
So,
has shifted
Are you talking,
results.
just to clarify, the online portal for building permits or the website where we just post notices?
I'm looking at both.
Okay.
I look at that, where you have a choice of years, and the website only shows 2 or 3, and I'm thinking, I know there's more than that.
So the
so it's-
website notices, we're trying to keep that. I think that historically has been a little less secure. But when we do notices that we have to publish, they are on the website. But then anything that comes into our system as an application ends up on the online portal, which is where the building permits are and everything. So, and with that one, I'm trying to put as much information. Yes, a process 2, which in this case would be something the size of a Sherwin-Williams or 4 dwelling units. So if you were doing a 4-plex, which we don't really have, I mean, we have triplexes more than 4-plexes, would not have public notice because it's allowed use. When we discussed it, we talked about it's no different than, I mean, some of those are less size than some of the big houses that get built. So once it gets over that, then yes, it's going to get a mailed notice to 500 feet. It's going to get a yellow sign that we're going to make them do at a larger scale. And it's going to be on the website. It's going to be on the bulletin board. And it'll have a comment period where they can comment. And they can, if enough people that meet the criteria when we get to that section request it, we would also, or if we felt like staff could also request a neighborhood meeting if we felt like it was something of significance. But again, these are projects that our zoning use table says is allowed outright, and they're meeting all the criteria.
Okay. All right, so just opening it up. So we're in discussion. We have a motion that's been seconded. If we're ready, we can take it to vote. Yes.
I'll speak to my motion. Thank you. It looks as if by going through this, we are meeting the goals and intents was to streamline the processes for staff and brought to us by the state, once again, to improve efficiency and address industry standards. And I believe this does this.
Yeah.
To the best fairness to the public and to staff. My one question is, and this may have been answered prior, is what I see in here a lot of times, it says to refer to the community development director. What if the city did, and this has happened before, what if the city does not have a community development director on staff? Does it go to, even the smaller site plans go to, minor ones go to the hearing examiner in the absence of a community development director?
In that case, they would use one of our consultants like we had with Brittany.
Oh,
Who would then review it. Again, you're reviewing to the criteria. Do they meet the criteria? And any of those, if you're a party of record, could be appealed to a hearing examiner if you really thought your staff was way out of line. But
that's like somewhere in our code that they can't just pass it on to a janitor or somebody to.
no, and there's something that says, because technically I'm not a community development director, I'm a planning manager. So somewhere in there is a definition or a statement that says, in the absence of a community development director, the mayor will assign who fills that role. And so, like I said, if I don't know, up and decided to, get sick, or, no, I was gonna say like I won $1 million.
There you
I guess
go.
I'd have to win more than $1 million.
That's a little more
But
positive.
if I won the lottery and said goodbye, we still have HBL as a consultant, so they would just bring them in and they would do it for us.
Fair enough, thank you.
All right. So again, we have a motion to move to recommend to the City Council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.62, site plan approval. It's been stated twice. We've discussed it. So I'll go ahead and take it to vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? We've got, motion passes 5, oh,
I apologize.
Any
Who
abs-
seconded that?
it was.
It was
Seconded
Al.
by Commissioner Sweat.
Okay, thank you.
Motion passes 5-1.
What was this outcome?
5-1.
5-1?
And where was the negative? Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, with agenda item 60, just for the sake of making sure we're clear when it's time for voting and the motion, let's, introduction by staff, quick summary of revisions, any discussions or questions, and then we will accept motions to, as recommended by staff.
Is this 6C?
This is 6D.
Oh, I thought we changed the letters because we moved it. Okay.
Well, we didn't change the letters. We just moved B to the bottom.
Yeah.
So 6D, Chapter 1765 variances. So based on discussion at the last meeting, staff did come in, and I did work with the attorneys a little bit. Andrew did go through this one with me. We came out with one set of review and approval criteria. So whether it is staff level review or hearing examiner review, it's the same criteria. We also, I changed the wording. So instead of going with minor and major, I went with administrative and hearing examiner. Some of that's just looking at what other cities have done, keeping terminology. And we also specified that administrative variances, so staff level variances shall only be for bulk and dimension regulations. So setbacks, lot coverage, frontage, anything that's in those tables, that's the only thing that staff can do up to a 20% mark. If it's anything else above that, or if it's something, maybe it has to do with parking or something, that would have to go to the hearing examiner, and it would follow all of the notice guidelines of that. So that's what we restricted what specifically staff level can do. And like I said, and then also made sure that up in the purpose statement, it does still say that you cannot, no matter who you go to, there is not an exception for the use table, and there's not an exception for the procedural requirements.
All right, so we will first open it up for discussion. Are there any comments? No motion yet. I'm going to do discussion first and then motion, because then I start getting,
We're doing it reverse.
yeah. So if there's any comments, yes, Commissioner Whalen.
Could you speak to the difference between a variance and a reasonable use permit? Because it seems that a reasonable use permit does allow you, or not you personally, but it does allow an applicant to vary the use.
Yeah, so a reasonable use permit is only in the environmental section. It's basically if you have a property that, let's say, is 100% wetlands and buffer, we have to allow them some use of that, some reasonable use of that property. So that section is only in a very specific, it's only allowed in a very specific place in Title 18, where they're trying to, where we have, as staff has said, it's all covered in wetlands. They can come in and say, yes, we want to apply for a reasonable use permit. They would then go through a hearing examiner to make their argument of why that means they should be able to build a home, or they should be able to put a coffee shop, or what. So that it's a very specific, just to the environmental critical areas code.
It doesn't say that. Or where does it say it, I should say? It says it's a process type 4 of 1771.
So I guess the only time it talks about that you can use a reasonable use permit is in Title 18.
Okay.
We'll see if, so,
Okay.
yeah, my battery's low, it's not happy. But I can bring it up on this one. But yeah, the only place where it even, where the term reasonable use permit is and where it says you can do that is. Or Florida. Yeah, so, 1816-110 is the reasonable use permit. And that's where, you know, kind of like we have the chapters on site plan, this is the chapter on that talks about reasonable use permit.
Another question.
Yes, go ahead.
Can we add something that says shall not set a precedent for both types of variances?
Where?
Do we not?
I guess the issue is if someone sees a variance taking place in town and someone says, hey, I want that too, and then says, well, you gave it to them, why can't you give it to me? So that's the generic thinking behind it.
Are you looking for a spot that?
Yeah, because I thought we had it in the previous version, so maybe, oh, here we go, up under, so at the top of page 44, which is under decisions and appeal process, number C says, approval of a variance shall not be construed as a new standard and does not guarantee future variance approval. Does that satisfy?
Very good, yes, thank you. I noticed something else that was in prior code that talked about the need for the variance is not the result of deliberate actions of the applicant or property owner or their agents. And I noticed that this code and prior write-up deleted the agents of the applicant or the property owner. And I wondered if there was a reason to that.
Nothing specific.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, as far as comments for me, I'm really happy to see this. This has been something we've been talking about since 2020, if I remember right, and I've kind of asked this to come on a few times to the annual agenda, so I'm happy to see a big box checked off as far as just getting this discussion and getting this going. So with that, do we have any further discussion? Yes?
Scribner situation, and maybe it will be caught when the clean copy's made, but on page 43, if you look at 1765-025, that doesn't exist in writing anymore because of the revision.
Yep, thank you.
And the other thing is .050, .060, 070, 080, when you look on pages 45 and 46, the name, I guess, of
Yeah,
the
those section names need to be
sections
updated.
need to be updated.
Thank you.
And is this the point where we would say why we would or would not support, or wait till the motion and then? I think you wait till the motion and then.
Yeah, we'll do the motion and then. Okay, 'cause, yeah, it's just one of those that I wanted to have the discussion first
That's
before the
great.
motion,
good.
in case the person that made it wanted to amend their motion based off the discussion. So, yes, Commissioner Johnson.
Page 44. Under 1765-040, it goes A, B, and there's a C, but there's nothing by C.
It wouldn't, yeah,
Is D really C?
yes.
Okay,
It was a formatting thing, I
Yeah.
can't get it to go away.
it's a,
Don't know.
okay, good. And then, that's what I figured, I just wanted to clarify in my head. And then when we get down to the variance request is not for the sole purpose of making the property more profitable or for demonstrated, nor is always used with neither nor. So it's either not, I mean, it's just grammatical for me. The variance request is not for the sole purpose of making the property more affordable or for a demonstrated or perceived loss of value instead of nor, N-O-R.
I think because I had not, I used nor, but I can check that.
Yeah, I think, and I think that one's interesting. Have we had, how did that come about? I mean,
The English language is.
I mean, I think it's good because people do that.
Fix that as a Scrivener's even up without major.
Right, right. It's just,
I will double check that grammar. It
It's-
didn't pop when I ran it.
yeah, that's okay, because it's always usually neither. Nor. Okay, I think, we've already, as we said on this, we've discussed it multiple times, and so those are just,
All right, so at this time, I ask for a motion.
oh,
Yes.
I move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to MMC Chapter 17.65 variances.
Second.
Second, all right, we have a motion to move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.65, variances. Motion made by Commissioner Johnson, seconded by Commissioner Zaro. We'll go ahead and do a quick, if there's any discussion about whether you are for or against, and then we will go to a vote.
I want to commend staff for making a lot of improvements. I still have great trepidation about variances, feel very strongly about our code, and wish things were made stronger. And for that reason, while I heartily acknowledge what's been improved, I still will not support this. I don't think it's a strong enough change. Thank you.
Any other comments before going to vote? Yes, Commissioner Boyle.
I will support this, but I am not very happy with loopholes, and this creates loopholes. And we should not be creating loopholes. And that's all I have.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion that's been seconded. I can't remember if I've said it twice now, so I'll say it again just in case. Motion to move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.65 variances. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
Okay.
All right, motion passes 5-1.
So the third 6E is draft proposal amendments for Chapter 1770, application requirements. For the most part, it is just making sure that the table is up to date with the current terms, forms, process that we use now. One of the things that was added since the last meeting was, you will see it on the page 51, is that about halfway in the middle of the page is the cultural resource assessment. It's only required for major site plan approval and conditional use. This is something that is consistently required through the SEPR process by the Puyallup tribe. So since we know it's going to be requested, it makes sense to put it as a requirement so they know ahead of time, and it comes in with the initial packet, and I'm not after the fact asking them for it. Honestly, it provides, so far, everyone comes back that they don't finding anything, and that actually is a nice protection for them up front, that they've done the due diligence. And if for some reason they dig deeper and find something, it actually gives them a level of protection. It's also is important with the new rules that we do have up-to-date list of what's required for an application, because for the bigger projects, part of my job is when an application comes in, I have 28 days to determine if it's complete. Once it is determined it's complete, And that has to be, for the most part, based on what we told them they needed to give us. That's when that time clock starts that the state does. So since a couple of the projects have smaller timetables, we want to make sure that we are saying, this is what you have to give us. And so if they don't, I say it's not complete. If they give it to us, and then I'm like, oh, but we also want this, that can hurt our timeline as a city. So for the most, like I said, there's nothing drastic in here other than just making sure it's up to date.
Okay. So same as we did for the last agenda item, I'm just going to open it up for a round of discussion, questions, comments before we go to any motions on this. Yes, Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you. On page, oh, I'm looking at the prior edition, excuse me. It's the columns that start with site plan approval, and I'm looking at an older version, excuse me.
So 51.
I want to
looks
say
like
the
it.
third page
Okay.
of it. I was pleased to see some of the additional items listed. I wondered why a minor site plan approval did not include a survey. It seems like it would be a helpful thing. So,
Because there are things that require a minor site plan that a survey would not be necessary for. If you're just adding on to a building or something. So,
so are you still able to ask for things that are not checked off in these boxes?
Yes.
Is there something that allows you to look at a situation in
at
context?
the very bottom of the page, on each one of these, it says additional information requested by the city. And even if it comes in and they gave us everything we wanted, we can say, okay, it is complete because you gave us what's on the list. But when we do our first comment letter, we may kick it back and say, well, we need a survey for these reasons. And as long as those are legit reasons, then they are then required to do it. So, and then again, like I said, minor site plan, a lot of times is something very small. And so in most cases, it won't be necessary.
Also, the same sort of question regarding a survey for a major or minor variance. So if you're talking about administrative bulk and dimension regulations, and you don't have a survey in front of you to know, I mean, wouldn't that be something, a survey you'd want?
Again, it would depend on what they're requesting for the variance. Yes, if they're, if it's most of the time, a variance is going to be tied to another application. So if they're coming in and they're wanting to do a plat, the plat's going to require the variance, or the plat's going to require the survey. And if the variant, because the last couple we've done have been short plats, well, they're going to have to do the survey for the short plat. And if they're saying, well, we're requesting a variance for a smaller frontage, then we're going to say, yes, you need to give us a survey. So again, there are times when you're not going to need a survey it would just be dependent on what that variance is, whether it would be required.
I appreciate that. On that same page, 53 of 81, plat certificate or title report, I might be reading it wrong, but it looks as though the X marking site-specific, there's some things that have been not checked off. They've been, so I was curious about that as well, and I might not be reading it properly.
We talked about the site-specific future land use before, but then said the comprehensive plan was its own. Wasn't that a?
Yeah, so
Different,
they have to provide proof of ownership. Again, I guess that I don't have strong heartburn either way. The feeling was, though, that a plat certificate or title, a lot of times you're looking for things that may not be necessary, or like I said, with the variance, a lot of times you're tying it to something else. If everyone would feel comfortable including it, that's fine.
Well, it's just a question. You understand the process better. I just wanted to be sure you're getting all the documents you need in advance so that you're making best use of the clock. But the mention of a boundary line adjustment on page 51, it just seems as though, so you got the plat certificate, the survey on a boundary line adjustment. When you do a boundary line adjustment, would the survey be required to show existing buildings? I'm thinking of a few boundary line adjustments in the past, and a house and a detached garage were segregated, so that you ended up with a garage as a standalone accessory use, and that was the only thing on the lot. And I didn't think our code would allow that, because you can't have an accessory use without the thing it's an accessory of, the principal use. So I'm thinking about, well, what about electricity that went to that garage? What about, so are those the things that you'd look at as red flags or questions to come up, and you'd, do you have the documents here to be clear about that? Because
So if you're asking, I mean, what's required in a survey, I believe in this section, it talks about, I guess it talks about what civil utilities are. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at those. So somewhere we have, I know that there's somewhere that describes what is required when we review those specifically, so.
okay, thank you.
All right, any other discussion or questions? Commissioner Johnson, and then Commissioner Zara.
At the bottom of each of the tables, the asterisk when not category exempt, I've been trying to figure out where that asterisk refers to.
Only on the, yeah, page 51,
Where?
or I guess it's on any of them.
Yeah.
It's the SEPA environmental checklist.
Environmental checklist.
So
page
it's,
51,
so it's
and
any of the
it's five.
tables, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down from the top. State Environmental Policy Act, SEPA checklist.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
they have their own categories of when a SEPA checklist is required. So if the state doesn't require, we're not requiring it,
Okay.
is all that's trying to say.
All right. Okay, thank you.
And that's the terminology they use.
All right.
Commissioner Zara.
Yes, I like the language change to administrative and hearing examiner from our last conversation. Should the table on, I guess, yeah, the table on 53, the column heading, says major or minor,
Yes,
should that change, or just cross out major or minor, just leave it as variances?
it probably can just see variance. I probably don't need that at all, because if I'm requiring for the same for both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, going once, going twice. Any other comments, questions? All right, if there's a motion,
I'll move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to MMC Chapter 17.70 application requirements.
Second.
all right, a motion has been made by Commissioner Johnson and seconded by Commissioner Boyle to move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments for Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 1770, application requirements. Any further discussion or comments? All right, we'll go ahead and put it to a vote. All those that are in favor of the motion to move to recommend to City Council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 1770, application requirements, please say so by saying aye. Aye. All those that oppose? All right, motion passes unanimous, 6-0. Okay, we are right at 8 o'clock, so I'm guessing we will move agenda item 6B. Oh, wait, no, we still have 6F. Right? Yeah. Are we okay to continue for 6F? As far as respecting everyone's time?
Yeah.
To do what?
So we have 6F, and then honestly, 6B, depending on, the introduction could be pretty quick, and then again, it could be sent home, and as people have time to look at it and think on it, we could, depending on how much time that you guys want to stay past your 2 hours.
Could the intro be an email?
It would be real quick.
Okay.
You could, you got the furthest to drive.
All right. So we'll continue on with agenda item 6F, and we'll double
see
check
what
on
time it
time.
is.
Okay.
So yes, permit decision and appeal process. We didn't, I don't believe did any, I did meet with the attorney, so there's probably some tweaks that he required of me, but nothing of substance since the last meeting. Oh, I take that back. So what did come up in conversation is on page 78, there is a section in the state law, so they've updated the timetables, which is part of what's kicked off us needing to update this. With that, there's actually a refund, where before there used to be no penalty if the city didn't meet our requirements unless a developer decided to sue us, which is very rare, that they would want to go through the effort. So there is a refund section that they have now adopted as a, I don't know, carrot stick for cities to try to keep on track. We didn't have to require it. We don't have to put it in the code, but when I talked to the attorney, our feeling was when the next person comes in after me or somebody's looking, they're not going to go to the RCW, they're going to look here. So it makes sense to put, so it's not verbatim. I tried to sort of rework it in the way that I think we would like to run it. But basically, there are certain exemptions or extensions that apply. So for the 170 days, there's things that when the clock stops, there's things where we can give extensions. But basically, if we would have to refund 10% if the final decision was made after the deadline, but did not exceed 20% of the original period, and then we'd have to do 20% if it's exceeds 20% of the original timeline period. Or they have the option where the city could choose to only collect 80% up front, and if we're on time, collect the other 20. I think we'll stick with we're just going to collect the money up front. We are, in most cases, on time. Our problem is usually not us. It's usually not the city. It's usually the applicant sitting on a project. So I did also, that being an issue, on page 77, let's see, on both 76 and 77, I did add some additional, so on 77, you can see 4, and then 5 is a vesting thing that the attorney and I put in to make it clear for vesting of a project. But number 4 is sometimes the way our system works, again, the clock starts when staff determines that an application is complete. And so we want to make sure it's very clear. And so on page 76, it basically says if if an applicant is not responsive for more than 60 days after the city has notified the applicant that they need additional information, they may have another 30 days, maybe added to review times. And then if the applicant is not responsive for more than 90 days, we can determine it would basically be deemed withdrawn and they have to start over. It's a little hedgy right now of when I can do that, and I wanted to make it really clear that, we're supposed to remind them after 60 days. If it goes another 30, they're withdrawn. And then same thing on page 77 when we're talking about it, is the way our system works with our software is they send us an application, we put it in the system, then we invoice them and give them the coding language to upload their full packet. I don't want any, and we have some that, we send them an invoice, it says, and it just sits there and they haven't paid, they've given us an application, but they haven't paid. And so I don't want them to say, well, you've had it for 28 days. It's complete, even though they haven't paid or given us anything. So it's very specific that if it's not paid within 30 days of being invoiced, it's considered withdrawn. So those are things I added just to realizing on the other end, sometimes I have to drop projects and I want to make it real clear that I can do that. So
right?
Thank you.
Okay. So again, we'll do the same idea as far as just a round of general comments, questions about this topic, and then we'll go into any motions. Anybody?
Okay,
Go
I
once,
had
go twice. Commissioner Whalen.
just a couple of, I guess they're called Scrivener errors or things edit-wise. On page 63 of 81, the bottom row labeled timeline, that is all new, so it should be red ink for the benefit of
It should be red.
next readers. And the other thing is that the various parts of this chapter refer to it, excuse me, as computation of time, time period, time review period. There's a lot of words, so just a suggestion to maybe take a look at that, and maybe it refers to a specific section, or maybe it's clear, and it just stood out to me. And the, let's see, and that was 1771-100. And then you get down to paragraph D, and it says clock operation. So there's just a lot of different ways to talk about timeline, and I just wanted to make sure it was the best term to use. Page 64, the variances, having the prior language, major and minor, and the new nomenclature of administrative variance and hearing
that,
examiner
yep.
variance. And just a general comment is just, I'm glad to see that things have gotten more specific and really identifying where that clock starts and stops, particularly for all the implications of that. So, thank you.
All right. With that, any further comments, questions? Yes, Commissioner Boyle.
I appreciate the fact that our notification signs will be improved via the applicant. And I'm gonna have to find something else to gripe about now. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So with that, staff has recommended a motion to move to recommend to City Council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 1771, permit, decision, and appeal process. Do I have a motion? You can say so motioned.
I move to recommend to the city council the draft proposal for amendments to MMC Chapter 17.71 permit decision and appeal process.
Second. All right. So we have a motion to move to recommend to the City Council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 1771, permit decision and appeal process. Any last questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Whalen.
So I won't be supporting this, though there have been many improvements. I'm sorry to see the downgrading is not quite the right word, but the moving decisions farther to the internal side of things. I wasn't able to really catch in state legislation where it said, for example, a major site plan has to be a process type 3. So just as an example. So streamlining, maybe we were streamlined enough, is my thinking. I'm also sorry to see that some of the language that really cited criteria and other specifics have been removed. And so it's for those reasons and primarily that I would vote no on this. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, so again, we have a motion to move to recommend to the City Council the draft proposal for amendments to Milton Municipal Code, Chapter 1771, permit decision and appeal process. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 5-1. All right, so very quick highlight.
Very
6B.
quick. I was afraid that there was too much on this agenda, but we need to keep moving forward. So I have included, as you can tell, I have included the old the current use table, which has 156 uses. The new one has only 70 because a lot of what I've tried to do is use the International Building Code use and occupancy categories to group things that are similar in nature. If you want to look at the page 9, the actual, our proposed table, the first section is residential. It really isn't drastically different than the current. So take a look at that. And then I put everything that's non-residential. Our current talks about industrial, commercial, civil, but those can be in any different zone. So I felt like just anything that's non-residential is listed. Again, all food and drink establishments. And if you look on the blue pages, everything should have a definition. So if you're not sure what that means, go to the definitions, check it out. And then on the back side, I did pull public facilities. I debated on whether that should be its own section or not. I went ahead and did that. And then I have accessory use categories together. My intent is to, so let's say you have a mercantile, so you have a hardware store. You could have a hardware store that's all interior, or you could say, well, we want a hardware store, but we want outdoor sales. So they would add on the accessory use category for outdoor sales. My intention is for for most things in the accessory use category, they're all going to have a definition, and there are a lot of these are going to get referred to the general use regulation section, which has additional criteria. So my intent for making it an accessory use category is that so if you have a drive-through, and some of these we have, some of these we're going to have to develop. So we don't currently have separate criteria for drive-throughs, but I think we should develop some. We already have for vehicle infrastructure. We do if you're a heliopad, you have to go to the special section. So that's kind of my thinking, is that the accessories are added on to some of those primaries, and if they don't have specific criteria, then we probably, for the, like I said, in the general use regulations, then we're going to then my intent is to add them. And then I have put right now, the only thing listed as specifically prohibited is the marijuana. I have made it a prohibited in all zones section. These are things that are my suggestions. See what you think. Some of them are just things that I'm thinking, do we really want a composting facility in our town? We do not want a data center. That's the Bitcoin where they have all those computers and it eats your electricity and you get nothing back for it. So truck parking storage, I don't believe we want that anywhere in the city. Surface mining is going because it's being long-term leased. My suggestion is we move that. So take a look at this over the next week or so. Think about, are you comfortable? I mean, I did pull out self-storage as prohibited because I don't feel like we need any more self-storage.
About car washes.
But maybe you're like, no, self-storage is fine. It shouldn't be prohibited. So look at that. And then as I look on the use categories that I've grouped, there may be one that you're like, well, within that category, I mean, if you really feel that like coffee stands should be different, why? Is there certain zones we don't think we want coffee stands in? Then yes, maybe it needs its own line. If you're like, we're allowing coffee stands the same place we're allowing restaurants, then it's fine that it's all under the same category. So take that with you, look through that.
Are the prohibited in all zones, so like if there's one existing that it's like an existing self-storage, I mean, it's not going to be.
Right, then it falls under legally non-conforming. It's fine to be there. If the entire thing burned down, they would have to put something else up.
Gotcha.
The problem with self-storage is there's no jobs, there's no sales tax, and it's very little property tax. So there's not a lot of value to the city or the residents.
No, but there seems to be a high demand
Yeah.
because they're everywhere.
And
So-
their garages are full.
All right, great. So as far as homework for that goes, just read it over, send comments to staff in the meantime, and be prepared to discuss it at not our November 6th meeting, but at our November 13th
Yes,
meeting.
which is why we have the November 13th as the backup, because we'll probably need it.
Okay,
I have nothing for staff report at this point in
all right.
life.
Commissioner reports.
Me? Nada.
Sure, none?
Nada. Nothing.
Commissioner Boyle?
Just a reminder, our next special meeting, November 6th, will be the day after the election. So
Everybody behave themselves.
if there is martial law declared, we may have to make a last minute. I've heard rumors.
Oh, that's like
Commissioner Zarro?
Nothing for me.
A little bit random, but I was on the city website and I noticed some cool new cheat sheets for fencing, ADUs, and signage. And that was a recommendation a while ago, and I was just really happy to see those little cheat sheets that just help people know what does and doesn't need a permit. A lot of the graphics that we saw when we were doing our reviews before are on there. So it is noticed, appreciated, and thank you. Continuing down the row, Commissioner Whalen, any commissioner reports?
No, I have some, I don't have anything to report as a commissioner. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Swift? Nope. All right, so,
I did think one thing.
okay,
Anyone wants to help out at the Halloween
trunk or treat,
Or you, yeah.
feel free to come.
You could have a planning commission one.
I can sit at your desk, but I'm not going to do it.
Okay. So our next special meeting is a special meeting, November 6th at, is it 6 p.m.? Okay, at 6 p.m. here on site.